Okay, so here we are talking a little bit about negotiating job offers. Again, I am Diane Hull. I work in career services on the team that works with graduate students and postdocs. Why might you negotiate, right? Let's talk a little bit about that. So the most important thing to remember is that future annual pay raises really depend on your base salary. And so when you start a job and you are offered a opportunity, you will then every year, hopefully, be getting a raise, a percentage, generally speaking, based on what your base salary is. And so it's in your best interest to really try and maximize the base salary that you can get at the get-go so that your future raises will be based on a higher salary. Retirement benefits often depend on your base salary. And because of these annual raises, salary negotiations have a compounding effect over time, right? So that's if your base salary starts a little bit higher and then you get a 3% raise every year, that's going to compound over time. So you don't actually need to negotiate, but most people do, and most employers expect it. And so occasionally there are a few industries in which negotiation is less common, most notably in consulting and also in things like accounting, where they tend to hire into what they call class categories, right? And so we were actually on a panel yesterday about first round interviews, and there was a recruiter from McKinsey. They are one of the firms that really doesn't negotiate salary. Basically, everyone coming in at a certain level is offered an identical salary. But for most organizations, salary negotiation is expected in some way, shape, or form. So when to negotiate? So the most important thing to remember is to really wait until you have an offer in writing. It's very tempting. Sometimes employers encourage you right when they're offering you the offer over the phone to start asking questions like, okay, what do you think about the salary? Could we have a conversation about this? But once you have been offered an opportunity verbally over the phone, the ball is really in your court. The recruiters that we had on our panel yesterday talking about interviewing said over and over again, look, the recruiter is your friend. We want you to take this job ultimately. But so that means that you really have the opportunity to sort of slow things down a little bit. And so the first order of business is to say, I'm so excited about this opportunity. I'd love for you to offer it me in writing. And then, after I've had a chance to look, we can have a conversation. Negotiate only if you are interested in accepting. If you have more than one offer and you know that one of them you're just not going to take, it's probably best that you just don't work on negotiating an offer that you really have no intention of taking. If you think there's a chance that you would take it though, then I encourage you to explore that. And don't accept the offer before negotiating. All of you guys are doctoral students and postdocs, so you've been working toward job opportunities for a very long time. And if you get something that you're excited about, it's really easy to just jump right in and say, yes, I'm so happy that I'm graduating and moving on. But you definitely want to at least do some level of negotiation before you accept that opportunity. So pre-offer negotiations, many of you guys participating today may be in a position where you're applying to jobs right now, but you don't have an offer. Negotiation often kind of kicks in right when you start applying, right? You're providing the employer with certain kinds of information. They're using that information to put together your offer. So while you don't have an offer yet, the negotiation process really kind of kicks in right away. So most employers have some sort of an online application form that you have to fill out. They will very often ask you the question of what's the expected salary. It's becoming increasingly common that employers are not allowed to ask previous salaries. The city of Philadelphia is an example. Any employer that operates in the city of Philadelphia may legally not ask what your previous salary was, but they can ask what it is you hope to get. So we always recommend trying to fill that in with text, such as negotiable. You might write in market rate without an exact number. If it's possible, enter a range, right? Rather than entering a specific dollar amount. In interviews, try to delay answering that question. So a lot of times in a first round interview, what sometimes an employer might refer to as a screening interview. You may be meeting with a HR representative for 30 minutes. They might ask about your salary expectations. And actually, some of the advice that we have gotten from recruiters is it's perfectly okay to turn that question around and say, it would be really helpful for me if you could share the hiring range that you're looking to hire, and share your thoughts on that rather than you providing information. You can answer with a range if you're pressed. A lot of students express concern that they will either ask for too low of a salary, and then, so if you ask for $10,000 less than the employer is willing to pay, that then they're not going to offer you that extra $10,000. The employers that we've spoken to said that's really not the case. You do want to be careful about not going way above what it is their hiring range is. And so doing your research ahead of time is really helpful in determining kind of what might be an appropriate amount. And so we're going to have some resources to talk a little bit about that. So once you've gotten an offer is often given via phone, sometimes by email. You might be contacted by a human resources representative, sometimes referred to as talent acquisition, or it could be the hiring manager, who's the person that you are actually going to be working for. So, it's always a little bit unclear who's going to do that. Generally speaking, it is given over the phone, occasionally over email. You do want to confirm that it is really an offer, and a job offer has a salary that goes along with it, right? An employer asking you, if I gave you an offer, would you take it, is not actually really an offer. They're kind of trying to feel you out. And so you really want to wait for that offer. And so the first thing that you want to do is say, thank you so much. I'm really excited about this opportunity. But again, resist the urge to accept it immediately, even if you know that you really ultimately would like to do that. And so what you want to do is first tell them that, you're very excited, and then say, thank you so much. Would you be able to give me this offer in writing, right? That's the first thing that you want to ask. And so usually they'll put together an offer letter and send it to you over email. And then you might say, okay, what I'd really like to do is, have a little bit of time to look over the offer, and how long you have to make the decision will vary, given what their needs are. Sometimes they may say we need to know in a week. Other times they may have a little bit more flexibility. You generally don't have an extended period of time into like multiple weeks and months, but so you really sort of need to get a sense of what the industry standard is. So preparing to negotiate. So the first thing that you really want to be doing is you really want to be collecting information. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. So the first is connecting with your networks. Ideally, you do this prior to the application process, so that going into the application process, you have some sense of what might be expected. Asking advice of alumni and other networking contacts is helpful. You don't actually really want to ask someone what their salary is unless they're a very close friend. But I do think it's fair in networking conversations to say, what does an entry-level person at your organization, what might the hiring range be? You could certainly ask networking contacts, what resources did you use that you found helpful while you were preparing for interviews and negotiating in this field? Researching the market is really helpful. I have really found dramatically in the last 2 years, a lot more transparency around salary and a lot more information out there. So you will find some professional associations have salary survey information on their websites. Public agencies, any state or federal government agencies publish all of that. I just was working with someone earlier this week who's actually negotiating a faculty offer at a state institution, and we were able to find an Excel spreadsheet of all of the salaries of the person in the department, because it's a state institution, so they have to provide that. Some nonprofits will make that available as well as part of their disclosures. The Occupational Outlook Handbook is given out by the federal government, by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics every year, and they will have a lot of salary information in there. But I'm going to share some information that I think would be helpful on websites that you have access to that would be helpful. And Joseph's posting a video that we did last semester for graduate students on some of these, as well as additional other resources that are helpful. So Glassdoor is often the first place that people go to. And I think it's not a bad place to look, but there's a couple of things that you need to understand about using Glassdoor. The first is that the salary data is self-reported. So the reason that this is key is because it's not verified information, right? Like, we have no way of knowing whether people are sharing the truth. I'd like to be optimistic and think that they are, but we just don't know. The other thing that Glassdoor is going to require is that if you would like to see the salaries at particular organizations, you need to first provide your own salary information, right? You don't have to have this information made public and associated with your name, but you do have to provide your own information in order for you to be able to see other information. There's also a salary calculator. So if you're looking to relocate, Glassdoor can be helpful. Glassdoor actually has a lot of information about interviewing. It has a lot of information about feedback that people have given on employers and on interviews. Again, you just have to really remember it's all self-reported. And I do tend to think that people who are unhappy seem to be more inclined to share their information than people that are happy. So just keep that in mind. Going Global is a resource that Penn gives you access to, so you can access it through our website. And Going Global is actually a website that's used for a variety of different reasons for people that would like to work abroad. But the one thing that it does have is a searchable database of H-1B visas. So anytime an employer in the US sponsors someone for an H-1B visa, they need to provide information to the federal government that will include the location of the job, employer name, job title, and salary. So whether you're an international student or not, I encourage you to take a look at Going Global, because if you are interviewing and negotiating with an organization that has sponsored anyone for an H-1B visa, you will see that information, and that can be very helpful whether you're an international student or not. So I'd recommend that. LinkedIn Salary also allows you to search in a variety of fields. You do first need to add your own data in order to unlock theirs. I think they say they give you a year's worth of access. This can also be very helpful if you're relocating and are looking for cost of living and trying to figure out what might people get paid in different areas, and including around the world. So a couple months ago, I worked with a student who was being offered a job in Europe, and really hard to understand, like, what's the going rate for a landscape architect in Europe. And we were able to do a lot of searching on LinkedIn Salaries database as well. So those are some resources that I think can be very helpful. So how to negotiate? So how are you going to do this? So scheduling a time to speak over the phone and allowing enough time to prepare for the call. So it is so tempting, because negotiation can be really nerve-wracking and sometimes uncomfortable, to try and negotiate over email. And we in Career Services would really strongly suggest against that. What I think is usually best is if you get it, let's say today is Friday. So if today you get an offer and you say, oh, I'm so excited about this, thank you so much, can you email me a copy of the offer? Let's say by the end of today, you get that offer in email. I might wait until at least Monday and send the employer an email and say, I'm really excited to have an opportunity to chat with you about the offer. Here are some days and times this week I'm available to talk. Can you please let me know when we might be able to schedule a time? The reason that you want to do that rather than picking up the phone and just calling them is almost nobody answers their phone these days. And then inevitably you're playing phone tag, and then maybe they call you back and you're at Starbucks or you're about to go somewhere and you're not prepared. You really want to schedule this time and give yourself time to prepare. Don't wait until the offer deadline to begin negotiating. So again, if you got an offer today and they said we need to know by next Friday, you don't want to wait until Thursday afternoon to start negotiating, because sometimes the person that you're negotiating with has some level of power to make decisions and to offer things to you. It's also very possible, though, that they don't have unlimited power, and they need to go back and check with other people. And so you really want to give a little bit of lead time there. And then, because as we say, that the employer usually needs to consult with others. You really want to research the cost of living, identify what your values, priorities, and the scope and responsibilities of the position are ahead of time. And I always say that you want to prioritize, think a little bit about what is it that you want to talk about, and talk about the things in order of importance. You also don't want to start with the easiest thing to ask for, right? So on the next slide here, we're talking a little bit about some of the things that are negotiable besides salary: relocation, job title, start date, all these different things that you're seeing here. Hybrid work certainly is something that can be negotiable. But when you are thinking about negotiating, try to come up with 3 things that you'd like to negotiate. And you want to think about what's kind of the hardest thing for them to say yes to versus the easiest thing. So sometimes an easy thing to say yes to is changing the start date, right? So if someone said, we'd like you to start July 1st, and you said, oh, I have a vacation, I'd like to start July 11th, which is 2 weeks later, right? That's an easy thing for them to say yes to. And so you kind of want to save those for after the harder things that you're asking for, because if they're saying yes to things up front and then you start asking for things that are harder, it can be easy to say no because they kind of feel like they already gave you something. So you want to think about that. Be sure to express your enthusiasm for the job. This is not an antagonistic situation. Recruiters have told us time and time again that they really, really are interested in you accepting this job. You know, they have gone through the process of putting out a job ad, interviewing people, and now they really want you to take the job. And so, you know, really expressing enthusiasm. These are your future colleagues. I mentioned earlier, prioritizing what you want to negotiate. Salary is usually the first thing that you want to talk about negotiating because you're asking for something more. But again, everyone has different priorities. And so you want to think about that. When you want to start off by negotiating the salary, the first thing you can do is sort of ask for permission. So you could say, I'm wondering if we could have a conversation about whether there's any flexibility in determining the salary. If you have a number in mind, you can always say, is there any flexibility in moving the salary closer to this amount? You could also say something like, you know, my research, let's say they offered you $50,000 and you might say, well, my research has shown that, you know, the average starting salary for this position is 55, you've offered 50. Can we have a conversation about what we might be able to do to get closer to that average? Be very intentional with your reasons. A lot of times I meet with lots of students who are getting married or buying a house. They have something personal that really makes them want to make more money. And I don't really think that bringing up these personal things is necessarily the direction that you want to go. I think it's much better to stick to the professional reasons and market rate reasons. So what do you do when you are waiting on another offer? So this is very, very common. I would say that most of my career advice to students boils down to 2 main themes. One is timing and the other is networking. And so timing is something that sometimes you don't have a lot of control over, right? You're applying to multiple jobs at once, but they don't all get back to you at once and they don't all move at the same speed. So first of all, you really want to be honest. Don't invent another offer that you don't have. And let's say that you've applied to employer A and employer B. And employer A is your first choice. Employer B has made you an offer. It's very, very acceptable to go back to employer A and let them know that information. This came up on our recruiter panel yesterday, and they said, yes, we absolutely want to hear about these things. So if you're waiting on hearing from employer A, it's fine to reach out to them and say, look, I just wanted to let you know that I have another offer and I'm wondering what your timetable might be, if there's anything you can do to move the timetable more quickly. The exception to this is if you've applied for a job and not interviewed, right? So let's say you've submitted application to employer A, but you haven't heard back from them. You can follow up and see if they might be able to move things more quickly. But unless the employer has already expressed some level of interest in you, either by inviting you for an interview, et cetera, there probably is a little bit less flexibility. And you can certainly ask employer A when they might be able to make a decision so that you could then go back to employer B and ask for an extension in the timetable in which you're having a conversation with them. So after the negotiations, if things have changed about the offer, if they changed a start date, if they changed a salary, signing bonus, et cetera, certainly you want to get a new letter from them so that you have that in writing. You absolutely want to thank everyone who helped you. So, you know, reaching out to networking contacts, reaching out to people that you met through the interviewing process. It's always appropriate to thank people for their time. If you have other opportunities that are still kind of going, but you know you're not going to move forward with those because you're accepting another offer, you do want to thank them for the interest, but withdraw from the job search. It's really the professional thing to do. It can be tempting to kind of see how things go, but one, you don't want to be preparing for an interview for a job you're never going to take. And second of all, when you accept a job, you have to make a commitment and keep it. It really is unprofessional to accept a job and then keep interviewing and then maybe go back and renege. We would absolutely never advise that anyone do that. And it can have a lot of professional ramifications for you. It's a smaller world than we think. And it certainly can have negative consequences for future Penn students. So we would strongly advise against that. You do want to be gracious when declining an offer. And, a lot of students often feel bad about declining an offer because maybe the employer has spent a lot of time with them and they're very, grateful for the time that they've spent with them. I think a really nicely worded email is fine. You're under no obligation to tell them where you're going. If they ask, you can share it if you want, but you don't have to. But at the end of the day, it's okay to decline an offer as well. We do have this great resource sheet on negotiating, and so I would welcome for you to take a look at this.